Welcome to Village Church Connections. I'm David Pavey, an assistant pastor. A few years ago, when ministering in England, I had the pleasure of driving the distinguished author Jill Briscoe to give a lecture at the London School of Theology. In the course of her presentation, she told the following simple story, which touched my heart. As a board member of World Relief, Jill visited Zagreb in Croatia during the Kosovo War with several American women. They were to meet refugee women, many of whom had lost their husbands and boyfriends in the Balkan War. "Whatever do we say to them?" the Americans asked Jill. "Just say, 'We had to come,'" advised Jill. In fear and trepidation over their inadequacy to help, the American women were soon surrounded by the refugee women. "What are the Americans saying?" Jill asked her interpreter. "They're just saying, 'We had to come.'" "And what are the refugee women saying?" asked Jill. Responded the interpreter, "They're just saying, 'You came. You came. You didn't just send a book or a CD or money or a care package. You came." Jill calls this the ministry of presence. How important is the ministry of presence? You probably can't do much to change the circumstances for somebody else, but your very presence is a comfort and a blessing to them. It's a sign that you care. I love that little story in the Bible where David was hiding from mad King Saul. Saul was trying to assassinate him. But Saul's son Jonathan went to David in Horesh and helped him to find strength in God. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord. And then we read, Jonathan went home, but David remained at Horesh. The ministry of presence, a friend to help in time of need. One day, one of my Albanian friends in England had to be confined to a mental hospital. He was suffering from schizophrenia. I visited him regularly, feeling totally helpless to change the situation. After being ushered through 2 locked doors, I would talk with him, tell him about his family, and pray with him. "Thank you for coming," he would say. "You are like Jesus to me." It was the ministry of presence. In 2002, my brother died of a malignant melanoma. He was 2 years my junior. We had grown up together and were close. Though his malady had rendered him a paraplegic, he died suddenly of massive internal bleeding, so it was a shock. At the time, I called my colleague Brian, a remarkable Christian leader who lived a mile or two away. He was sympathetic and said, "Would you like me to come over?" "No, thanks," I said. "I'll be fine." Then neighbor Tom dropped in, probably to borrow a garden tool again. Tom was a big bipolar alcoholic, a rough fellow indeed. Ignoring the purpose of his visit, I blurted out, "Tom, my brother just died." Tom threw his arms around me, gave me a big bear hug, and just held me for a long time. Sometime later, I had lunch with Brian. We recalled that day. I said, "Brian, in retrospect, you should have come." He agreed. I needed the ministry of presence, though too masculine to admit it at the time. 3 years after my brother passed away, my father died at the age of 94. At that time, we were ministering to refugees from the Balkans who had made their way to England. As soon as news of our bereavement reached the immigrant community, Nancy and I found ourselves with a room full of Albanians who had just come to exercise the ministry of presence. They just sat there, quietly, none of them able to speak much English. Admittedly, this was a cultural pattern of behavior for them, but still, it was a special comfort to see this demonstration of care, of love, of respect. It was the ministry of presence. Ray Bakke, the expert on urban evangelism, talks about the war in Vietnam. It couldn't be won by American pilots based in Guam and flying over the country in their air-conditioned cockpits, he said. It could only be won in hand-to-hand combat on the ground, which is why America didn't win. We can't live in antiseptic isolation and expect to bless our community. We need to live amongst our neighbors as salt and light and exercise the ministry of presence when needed. Some of us are naturally more task-oriented than people-oriented, but all of us need to keep before us the importance of the personal touch. I've been in situations where, as a pastor, I was only esteemed to be working when I was in my office. Now, that kind of work is important, and I do my fair share of it, but it's a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. In our busyness, let's keep in view the importance of the ministry of presence. Who in your orbit needs to feel your presence today? And thank you for tuning in to Village Church Connections.